Single dad confronts billionaire. Why is my son's photo in your mansion? The truth that emerged changed everything forever. Comment your city below and hit subscribe to join our global community. This story has an ending that will blow your mind. The maintenance supply closet smelled of pine cleaner and old cardboard boxes, a scent Marcus had become far too familiar with over the past 3 years. He'd worked at Sterling Country Club for long enough to know every corner, every hidden passage, every shortcut through the sprawling 17,000-square-foot mansion that served as the club's main building. Most of the club's members barely acknowledged his existence. He was part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the electrical system. Necessary, invisible, and expected to remain silent. Tonight, though, something was different. As Marcus pushed his equipment cart down the dimly lit hallway on the 4th floor, heading toward the private study that belonged to Victoria Sterling herself, his hands weren't quite steady. He'd been called to repair a loose section of crown molding that had been reported earlier in the day. A simple job, 15 minutes at most. In and out, no complications. Marcus had seen Victoria Sterling exactly once before, at a distance, when she'd walked through the main club lobby. Even from 50 feet away, she'd been striking. Tall, elegant, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. She'd been dressed in a navy designer suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month, moving with the kind of confidence that only came from a lifetime of privilege and power. She'd been speaking rapidly into a Bluetooth earpiece, discussing some business deal with the kind of casual authority that Marcus could never hope to possess. He'd quickly made himself smaller, the way he always did around the club's wealthiest members, moving out of her path without drawing attention. Now, as he stood outside the mahogany double doors that led to her private study, Marcus took a breath and knocked. No answer came. He knocked again, a little louder this time, still nothing. According to his work order, the room would be empty at this time of evening. Ms. Sterling was supposedly attending a charity gala downtown. Marcus turned the handle carefully and stepped inside. The study was exactly what he'd expected from a woman of her standing. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they'd never been opened. An enormous mahogany desk dominated one side of the room, its surface so polished he could see his reflection in it. Original artwork hung on the walls, paintings that Marcus recognized from an art appreciation class he'd taken years ago in college, before life had derailed his education in favor of survival. The carpet was so thick it swallowed his footsteps, but it was the wall above a mahogany credenza that stopped him cold. The photograph was no larger than 8 by 10 inches, but it seemed to consume the entire wall. Marcus's hands trembled as he stared at it, his throat suddenly dry, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were clearly seeing. It was Ethan, unmistakably his son, smiling that gap-toothed grin that appeared only when someone truly made him happy. His brown eyes sparkled with joy, and he was holding up a painting he'd made at school, a bright explosion of colors that represented, according to Ethan, the most beautiful sunset in the whole world. The photograph was framed in what appeared to be genuine gold leaf. Below it was a small brass plate that read simply, "Ethan, age 7, the light of my life." Marcus's breath came in shallow gasps. His hand reached out instinctively to touch the frame, then pulled back. How did she know his son? They'd never met. Ethan attended Lincoln Elementary School on the south side, miles away from the wealthy North Shore suburb where the Sterling estate sat. There was no possible intersection between Marcus's world and Victoria Sterling's, and yet here was proof that there was. He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands and took a photograph of the frame. He needed evidence of this. He needed to understand. The sound of the study door opening made Marcus spin around. His heart nearly stopped. Victoria Sterling stood in the doorway, still dressed in the navy suit Marcus remembered from weeks ago, though now it was slightly rumpled, and she looked tired. Her dark eyes widened when she saw him, and for a moment, genuine shock registered across her beautiful face. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. She was looking at him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. She seemed to be studying his features, searching for something. Marcus struggled for words. "I was called to repair the crown molding, but I need to ask you about that photograph." Victoria's face went very still. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her with a soft click that sounded far too loud in the sudden silence. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Marcus Webb," he replied. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "And I think you need to tell me why my son is hanging on your wall." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face had gone pale, and Marcus could see her hands trembling. She moved slowly to the desk and lowered herself into the chair behind it, as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "Please," she whispered. "Sit down." "I'm not sitting down until you tell me what's going on," Marcus said, his protective instincts screaming. "How do you know Ethan? What do you want with him?" "I don't want anything with him," Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. "That's not why. Marcus, when did Ethan turn 7? The specificity of the question threw him off balance. "Last month, March 15th. How did you—" "Because," Victoria interrupted, her eyes glistening with tears that she seemed to be fighting back, "that's approximately 7 years and 9 months after one of the most important nights of my life, the night I met his father." The room seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the back of the chair nearest him, his knuckles white. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he felt the truth of it. There was something in her eyes, something in the way she was looking at him, as if she were seeing someone else through him, or perhaps seeing him for the first time. "I've never met you before." "You haven't," Victoria agreed, "but I've known about you. I've always known about you, Marcus. I've been watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment to explain everything, to tell you the truth about who Ethan's mother really is, and why I can't stop thinking about the man who gave her the most beautiful thing she ever created." Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" he demanded. "Who are you?" Victoria stood up, moving around the desk toward him. As she drew closer, Marcus could see the fine details of her face, the delicate curve of her cheekbones, the way her dark eyes were shaped almost exactly like Ethan's. How had he not seen it before? How had he missed such an obvious resemblance? "I'm saying," Victoria whispered, "that I think I'm in love with you, Marcus Webb. And I think I have been since the moment I first saw you 7 years ago, when you changed my entire life without ever knowing my name." 7 years earlier, Marcus Webb had been a very different man. At 25, he'd still carried the optimism of someone who believed his life could be anything he wanted it to be. He was working his way through college, attending night classes at Northwestern University, while working days at a local restaurant. He'd had dreams of becoming an architect, of designing beautiful buildings that would stand for generations. He'd had friends who'd come and gone, relationships that had burned brightly and briefly, and a general sense that the universe was full of infinite possibility. Victoria Sterling, though he hadn't known her name at the time, had been just as different 7 years ago. She'd been 20, newly wealthy, having inherited her father's technology empire just 2 years prior when he'd suffered a massive heart attack. She'd been struggling with the weight of expectation, with board members who questioned her every decision, with a sense of isolation so profound it sometimes took her breath away. They'd met at a charity gala, one of 100 that Victoria attended each season. She'd been standing alone on a balcony overlooking Chicago's skyline, having escaped the crush of people and noise inside the grand ballroom. She'd been crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared out at the glittering cityscape. Marcus had stepped out onto that same balcony, looking for air and quiet after working the event as part of the catering crew. He'd been delivering champagne when he'd noticed her standing alone, and something about the set of her shoulders, the curve of her spine, had suggested profound sadness. He should have left her alone. Instead, he'd asked if she was all right. She'd laughed, a broken, bitter sound, and told him the most private things of her heart. She'd talked about how much she missed her father, about the pressure of running a company worth billions, about how everyone around her wanted something from her and no one cared about her as a person. She'd talked about feeling completely alone despite being surrounded by people. Marcus had listened. He'd been good at listening back then, before exhaustion and desperation had made him cynical. He'd shared his own dreams, his own fears. For 3 hours, they'd stood on that balcony talking as if no one else in the world existed. They'd talked about architecture and art, about family and loss, about hope and dreams. Victoria had rested her head on his shoulder at one point, and Marcus had put his arm around her. At the end of the night, with the understanding that this was something that existed only in that moment, they'd made love in an empty guest room at the hotel. It had been tender and passionate and absolutely real in a way that transcended their completely different circumstances. For those precious hours, none of their life situations mattered. They were just two people who understood each other completely. When the sun came up, they'd faced reality. Victoria had a husband waiting for her, a marriage her family had arranged, a union that was supposed to stabilize her control of the company. Marcus had been a nobody with nothing. They'd exchanged first names only, had promised not to try to find each other, had agreed that what had happened was beautiful, precisely because it was temporary and impossible. Marcus had never forgotten her. He'd thought about her often over the years, wondering who she was, if she was happy. But he'd built a life, had met a woman named Sarah, who'd become pregnant with Ethan, and had moved forward. His dreams of architecture had been sacrificed to the reality of needing to provide for a child. Now, standing in Victoria Sterling's study, Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "You were at the Rosewood Gala," he said slowly, the memory crystallizing. "That night, you were the woman on the balcony." Victoria nodded, tears now streaming openly down her beautiful face. "I've thought about that night every single day for 7 years, she said. "I've tried to move on, tried to convince myself that what happened was just a perfect moment frozen in time, nothing more. But Marcus, when I found out you had a son..." She paused, struggling for control. "I had to know. I had to understand who you were when you weren't with me." "How did you find out about Ethan?" Marcus demanded. "How did you discover?" "I hired a private investigator," Victoria confessed, "about 6 months ago. I'd reached my breaking point. My marriage is a sham. My husband and I separated 3 years ago, and we're in the process of finalizing our divorce. I'm finally free, Marcus, and I couldn't stop myself from looking, from trying to find the person who'd been my salvation that night." Marcus felt anger rising in him, hot and sharp. "You invaded my privacy. You've been watching my son without my knowledge. That's not romantic, Victoria. That's obsessive." "I know," Victoria interrupted. "Believe me, I'm aware of how it sounds. I've been seeing a therapist specifically to work through this. But Marcus, you have to understand, that night was the most real moment of my entire life. I walked back into my marriage afterward and felt like I was suffocating. I went through years of pretending, of playing the role society expected. And when my husband and I finally separated, it was almost a relief, because it meant I could finally admit the truth to myself." "Which is what?" Marcus asked, though he thought he already knew. "That I love you," Victoria said. "That I have for 7 years. That I want to know the man you've become, and I want Ethan to have the life he deserves." That I want to help you, to be part of your world, but not in this sneaking way. I want you to know who I am, to choose to know me, if you can." Marcus wanted to be angry. He wanted to storm out, to report her for harassment, to protect himself and his son from the intrusion of this beautiful, wealthy woman who'd turned his life upside down. But as he looked at her, at the vulnerability in her expression, at the longing in her eyes, he felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 7 years thinking about that night too. He'd never been satisfied with any woman since, never felt that same sense of complete understanding. "I need time," he said finally. "I need to process this." "I know," Victoria said, "and I'm sorry for how I went about it. I should have approached you differently. But Marcus, please, give me a chance to know you, to know Ethan. Not like this, not secretly, but openly. Give me that." Marcus turned and walked toward the door without responding. He needed air. He needed to think. Behind him, Victoria's voice was small and devastated. "Marcus, wait!" But he was already gone. For 3 days, Marcus said nothing. He went to work, he picked up Ethan from school, he made dinner and helped with homework, and tucked his son into bed each night. All the while his mind was spinning, processing what he'd learned. Victoria Sterling was the woman from that night. The woman who'd understood him completely, the woman who'd haunted his dreams and memories for 7 years. On the 4th day, a package arrived at his apartment. It contained no return address, but Marcus knew who it was from. Inside was a leather-bound photo album, expensive and beautiful. He opened it carefully. The first page was a letter in elegant handwriting. "Marcus, I shouldn't have given this to you, but I want you to understand. These are photographs that my investigator compiled. They document your life over the past 6 months, the ordinary, beautiful moments that make up your world. I watched you teaching Ethan to ride a bicycle in Grant Park. I watched you working late into the evening, building that bookshelf in your apartment. I watched you singing to him while you cooked dinner. I watched you being the kind of father, the kind of man that I always believed you could be. I'm not sharing these to justify my actions, but to help you see yourself the way I see you. You're extraordinary, Marcus. You've never given up, even when life demanded everything from you. You've raised a remarkable child with love and patience. You're the best of humanity, and I've spent years watching you from a distance, wishing I could be brave enough to step into your life and claim what my heart has always known, that you're meant to be mine, and I'm meant to be yours. I'm flying to our family's home in Cabo San Lucas for a week. I need some time away. When I return, I hope you'll be willing to have dinner with me. Real dinner at a restaurant where we can talk like the adults we are. Not as the man and woman from a magical night 7 years ago, but as the people we've become. I'm enclosing my private number. Call me if you decide you want to know me. Yours, Victoria. Marcus turned the pages slowly. The photographs were intrusive, yes, but they also captured something true about his life. There was one of him laughing with Ethan, caught mid-moment, pure joy on both their faces. There was one of him looking exhausted but peaceful in his small apartment, holding Ethan as his son slept against his chest. There was one of him at work, clearly absorbed in solving some problem. In all of them, Victoria's investigator had captured his essential self, flawed, struggling, but deeply genuine. He set the album aside and went about his day, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. That evening, after Ethan was asleep, he found himself calling the number Victoria had provided. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless, as if she'd been hoping for his call. "Marcus, I need to know everything," he said. "Not about the investigation, not about how you found me. I need to know about you, about the woman you've become, and I need you to tell me everything about Ethan's mother." There was a long pause. "Are you asking me to dinner?" Victoria asked carefully. "I'm asking you to start from the beginning," Marcus replied. And I'm asking you to be honest with me. If we're going to do this, if we're going to explore whatever this is, I need complete honesty." "You'll have it," Victoria promised. "All of it." They set a date for 2 weeks away. Victoria would return from Cabo, and they would meet at an exclusive restaurant that served French cuisine. Marcus made careful arrangements for Mrs. Chen, his elderly neighbor, to watch Ethan. He bought new clothes, spent hours overthinking what it meant to give this woman a chance. The night of the dinner, Marcus's hands were shaking as he sat across from Victoria in a candlelit corner booth. She looked devastatingly beautiful in a simple black dress, her dark hair styled elegantly, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. "Tell me about Ethan's mother," Marcus said, not bothering with small talk. Victoria set down her wineglass carefully. "Her name was Sarah Melvin. Did she never mention me?" "No," Marcus said, feeling a chill run down his spine. "You knew Sarah?" "I employed her," Victoria said quietly. "About 8 years ago, she was applying for a position as my personal assistant. During the interview, she kept staring at me strangely. At the end of the interview, she asked me if I'd ever been to the Rosewood Gala. I said yes, casually, not thinking anything of it, but Sarah, she started crying. She told me that she'd seen me talking to someone that night, that she'd watched the whole thing unfold." Marcus felt sick. "Sarah was there? She was at the gala?" "She was working as part of the catering crew," Victoria continued, "just like you were. And Marcus, she told me something that changed everything. She told me that you'd talked about me, that in the months after the gala, you'd come home and spoken about the woman on the balcony. She told me that you'd described me in loving detail, that she'd known she was losing you even before she became pregnant." "That's not—" Marcus started, but Victoria held up a hand. "Sarah was a kind woman, Marcus, but she knew you didn't love her the way you'd loved me, even though you'd only known me for one night. She got pregnant intentionally, hoping to make you stay. She told me all of this during our first conversation. She told me she was sorry, that she knew what she'd done was wrong." Marcus felt the world tilting again. He'd never known. Sarah had never told him the truth about how she'd become pregnant. She'd said it was an accident, that the birth control had failed. He'd believed her. He'd done the right thing, marrying her, committing to being a father. They'd stayed together for 6 years before she'd finally left, unable to bear the weight of a marriage built on half-truths. "Sarah worked for me for 3 years, Victoria continued. "We became friends in a way. She talked about you constantly, about how much you struggled, about how hard you worked to provide for Ethan, about how the weight of everything had crushed your spirit. And Marcus, she was consumed with guilt. Before she moved to Los Angeles with her new husband, yes, she's remarried and she's happy, I'm glad to tell you that, she asked me to find you. She asked me to tell you how sorry she was." "When was this?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. 2 years ago, Victoria said. "She was dying, Marcus. Pancreatic cancer. She didn't have long. And the thing she wanted most was for you and Ethan to have the life that she'd denied you. She made me promise that I would try to help you, that I would tell you the truth about that night, about what it meant, and that I would give you the choice to either accept my help or refuse it." Tears were streaming down Marcus's face. Sarah. Beautiful, troubled, complicated Sarah. She died 2 years ago, and no one had told him. But then again, they'd been divorced for a year already. He hadn't seen her in person for months before she'd left Chicago. "Why didn't she contact me directly?" Marcus asked. "Because she was ashamed," Victoria said gently. "And because she knew you would refuse help from her. But Marcus, you would never refuse help if it was being offered by someone you trusted. And Sarah hoped that eventually you might come to trust me." Marcus put his head in his hands. Everything he'd believed about his life had been a lie. His marriage had been built on deception. The beautiful night with Victoria had created consequences neither of them had anticipated. His entire reality shifted, reformed, revealed itself as something entirely different than what he'd thought. "I need time," he whispered. "I know," Victoria said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "And I'm sorry for all of this. I'm sorry that Sarah's pain led her to make that choice. I'm sorry that you have to process this." "Ah, but you're not sorry for loving me," Marcus said, looking up at her. "No," Victoria admitted. "I'm not sorry for that. Because it's real, Marcus. What we have, what we've always had, is real. And I think if you give yourself time to process everything, you might find that you feel the same way." Marcus wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. Because as he looked at Victoria, he felt the truth of it resonating through his entire being. The connection they'd shared 7 years ago hadn't been a fluke or a mistake. It had been real, and it had never truly died. It had just been waiting. The following weeks were marked by a strange sort of courting that existed between two people who'd already shared something profound. Marcus and Victoria met for dinners, walks through the park, afternoons at museums. They talked for hours, learning the details of each other's lives. Victoria told him about the burden of running a company that generated $3 billion annually. Marcus told her about his struggles, his fears, his dreams that had been deferred so long he sometimes forgot they existed. With each meeting, the connection deepened. Marcus found himself wanting to see her more, to share more of himself with her. But there was still one critical issue they hadn't addressed: Ethan. "When do you want to tell him?" Victoria asked one evening as they walked through Lincoln Park, their hands intertwined. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Part of me wants to wait until he's older. But another part of me knows that hiding this would be wrong. He deserves to know the truth." "The truth is complicated," Victoria said. "You're his father and you love him. I'm someone who loves him too, even though I've never actually met him in person. That's the truth." "He's going to have a lot of questions," Marcus warned. "I know," Victoria said, "and I'll do my best to answer them." They decided to tell Ethan together on a Saturday morning in Victoria's home. Marcus had prepared his son mentally over the previous few days, telling him that there was someone special he wanted him to meet, someone who was very interested in him. Ethan had been curious, excited, full of the innocent openness of childhood. Victoria had prepared extensively for the meeting. She'd consulted with a child psychologist to ensure she approached it in the most sensitive way possible. Ethan's bedroom had been stocked with books he'd expressed interest in, a small home recording studio for music that he was interested in learning, and supplies for the painting hobby he'd developed with Marcus's encouragement. When they arrived at the house, Victoria was waiting in the large, light-filled sitting room. She was dressed casually in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nervous, and that nervousness humanized her in a way that Marcus found deeply touching. "Ethan, this is Victoria Sterling," Marcus said, keeping his hand on his son's shoulder. "She's someone I knew a very long time ago, and she'd like to get to know you." Ethan, who was 7 years old and possessed of the kind of directness that only children have, asked immediately, "Are you Dad's girlfriend?" Victoria smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "I'm hoping to be," she said. "Is that okay with you?" "Are you rich?" Ethan asked next, his eyes taking in the obvious opulence of his surroundings. "Very rich," Victoria confirmed. "Does that matter to you?" "It's kind of cool," Ethan admitted, "but also kind of weird. Dad says rich people are usually mean and they don't care about normal people." "I'm not most rich people," Victoria said, exchanging a glance with Marcus that was filled with both amusement and tenderness. "And your dad is teaching me that caring about people is much more important than having a lot of money." They spent the afternoon together, and Ethan seemed to relax gradually. Victoria had a gift for making him comfortable, asking him questions about his interests and actually listening to his answers. She brought out supplies and they painted together, creating a scene of a castle in the clouds. Ethan was engaged, happy, clearly pleased to have an adult who was interested in him and his thoughts. By the end of the day, as Marcus was preparing to take Ethan home, his son asked Victoria, "Can we come back again?" "Whenever you'd like," Victoria said warmly. "Your father and I are very much hoping you'll want to." In the car on the way home, Ethan was quiet for a while, processing. Then, "Dad, is Victoria going to be my mom?" Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. This was the conversation he'd been both waiting for and dreading. "No," Marcus said carefully. "Victoria isn't going to be your mum. Your mum was your mum, and that was special and real, but I hope she might become someone very important in your life. She might become someone who loves us and wants to be part of our family, but in a different way than your mom was." "Okay," Ethan said, accepting this with the remarkable capacity that children have for understanding complex emotions without needing all the details explained. "I like her. I want her to come to my school play." Marcus felt his heart squeeze. "I'll ask her if she's available," he promised. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Marcus called Victoria. "He liked you," Marcus said without preamble. "I could tell," Victoria replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "He's a remarkable child, Marcus. Smart, sensitive, kind. You've done an amazing job raising him. He wants you to come to his school play," Marcus continued. There was a pause. "Really?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Always," she promised. "Are you prepared to integrate into our lives, into Ethan's life? Because if this is just something temporary, if you're going to get bored with us or move on to something else, I can't let you further into his world. He's already lost his mother. I won't let him lose anyone else. I'm prepared to spend the rest of my life with you, if you'll have me," Victoria said softly. "And I'm prepared to be the best part of Ethan's childhood, if he'll let me. This isn't temporary, Marcus. This is forever." The integration of Victoria into their lives was not without complications. Marcus's co-workers began to notice that he was arriving at work in better spirits, though he was careful not to discuss his personal life. The staff at the country club, who'd previously overlooked him as invisible maintenance, suddenly became aware that the mysterious billionaire who owned their facility had developed a personal interest in him. The gossip was inevitable. More concerning was the complication that arose from Victoria's soon-to-be ex-husband, Richard Sterling. Richard had been largely absent from Victoria's life for the past 3 years, but the moment he discovered that she was involved with Marcus, he became intensely interested in controlling the narrative. "He's a gold digger," Richard declared in the office of the family lawyer, attempting to block the divorce from proceeding. "He's using my wife to gain access to her wealth. We need to protect her interests." But Victoria was beyond Richard's control. At 27, she had complete legal authority over her own finances. She'd inherited the company in her own name, with no stipulations or conditions. Richard's attempts to portray Marcus as a fortune hunter fell flat when the evidence showed that Marcus had consistently refused any financial gifts that Victoria had tried to offer. The real complication came when Richard hired his own investigator and discovered something that Victoria had been keeping from Marcus. Richard Sterling was not Victoria's biological father. Victoria had known this since childhood. Her mother had confessed the truth when Victoria was 12 years old, explaining that Richard had been unable to have biological children and had agreed to adoption with the understanding that the secret would be kept from the rest of the world. Victoria's biological father was a man her mother had loved deeply but couldn't marry due to circumstances beyond their control. Richard found this information and used it as leverage, threatening to expose it to the public in a way that would damage Victoria's standing as the legitimate heir to her father's company. He claimed that the adoption had been informal, that Victoria's inheritance was therefore questionable, that he could contest everything in court. It was a bluff, ultimately. Richard had no legal standing to challenge the inheritance, but the threat of a very public scandal sent Victoria into a panic. She'd built her reputation on the image of being the sterling heiress, and if that foundation was exposed as somewhat illegitimate, it could affect the respect her employees and board members gave her. Victoria came to Marcus in tears one evening, confession pouring out of her. "I should have told you," she said desperately. "I should have explained before things got serious. But Marcus, I was ashamed. I know that's stupid because none of it is my fault, but I was ashamed of being adopted, of not being a true sterling. And then Richard found out, and he's threatening to expose it unless I get back with him." Marcus held her, letting her cry against his chest. "What does Richard want exactly?" "He wants me to admit that I'd made a mistake, that I want to reconcile. He's convinced that if we present a united front, if we stay married, he can maintain some level of control over the company." "And what do you want?" Marcus asked. "You," Victoria said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "I want you and Ethan. I want to divorce Richard and build a life with you. I don't care about the scandal. I don't care if everyone in Chicago finds out I'm adopted. I care about being with you." Marcus felt a surge of fierce love for her. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll deal with Richard together." What followed was a legal battle that made headlines in the Chicago society pages. Richard demanded increasingly large settlements, and Victoria, who initially tried to placate him, eventually stood firm. The adoption revelation became public, but it didn't have the devastating effect Richard had hoped. Instead, Victoria's honesty and transparency in addressing it earned her respect. She gave interviews about how her parents' love had nothing to do with biology, about how she'd been wanted and cherished from birth. The real turning point came when Victoria's biological father came forward. His name was Alexander Chen, and he was a renowned architect who'd been forced to give up his daughter due to his own family's disapproval of his relationship with Victoria's mother. Learning that his daughter had grown into a successful, compassionate woman filled him with pride and regret in equal measure. "I've followed your career from a distance," he told Victoria when they met for the first time since her infancy. "I was so proud. I just didn't have the courage to step into your life sooner." Victoria and Alexander developed a relationship over the following months. He attended her board meetings and offered strategic advice. He became a mentor and confidant, and when Marcus noticed the resemblance between Alexander and Ethan, he realized something beautiful. Ethan shared DNA with one of Chicago's most celebrated architects. "Do you think he inherited your gift for design?" Victoria asked Alexander one evening. "I think," Alexander replied, watching Ethan build an elaborate structure out of blocks, "that he inherited much more than just my genes. He has his father's heart, and that's far more valuable than any talent." By the time Richard's legal team accepted Victoria's final divorce settlement, which was generous but non-negotiable, Marcus had already begun to envision a life with Victoria that extended far beyond their current arrangement. She'd become woven into his and Ethan's existence in a way that felt natural and complete. Ethan had become accustomed to spending weekends at Victoria's penthouse apartment downtown and at her sprawling estate outside the city. He had a bedroom in both places, filled with things he'd chosen himself. More importantly, he had someone who was invested in his happiness, who attended his school plays and parent-teacher conferences, who helped him with his homework and listened to his elaborate stories about everything and nothing. Victoria, for her part, had undergone a transformation that no amount of money could have purchased. She'd hired an executive director to handle much of the day-to-day operations of her company, freeing herself to focus on the things that mattered. She'd become involved in educational non-profits, particularly those that help children from lower-income backgrounds access arts and architecture programs. I'm thinking about establishing a scholarship program, she mentioned to Marcus one evening as they lay in bed in her penthouse, watching the Chicago skyline twinkle below them. Something that would have helped you pursue your architectural dreams. Something that would ensure that financial circumstances don't prevent talented young people from developing their potential. The Victoria Sterling Scholarship for Dream-Following Young Architects, Marcus teased gently. I was thinking something less pretentious, Victoria said, laughing against his chest. Maybe the Alexander Chen Scholarship, named after my father. A way to honor him and his work, and to help kids who might feel as disconnected from their dreams as he did. Marcus pulled her closer. Your father would be proud. He is proud, Victoria said. He told me so. But Marcus, I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Marcus tensed slightly. Okay. Have you ever thought about going back to school? Victoria asked carefully. Finishing your architecture degree, because I've been thinking about it, and I believe you have the talent to do it. More than that, I believe you have the responsibility to do it. Your gift shouldn't be wasted on maintenance work. It was a question that Marcus had asked himself 1,000 times over the years, always dismissing it as impractical. He was 32 years old. He had Ethan to care for. He didn't have time for school. But with Victoria's support and her commitment to helping with childcare and finances, the impossible suddenly became possible. I'll think about it, Marcus said. I hope you do more than think, Victoria said. I hope you'll do it. Because, Marcus, I love you, and I want to see you become everything you were meant to be. I want Ethan to grow up watching his father pursue his passions. I want to build a life with the man you were always supposed to become. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. I love you too, Marcus whispered. It was the first time he'd said the words, and they felt both terrifyingly vulnerable and absolutely true. I think I've loved you since that night at the Rosewood Gala. I think I've been waiting for you my entire life, even when I didn't know I was waiting. Victoria kissed him then, slow and deep, a kiss that felt like coming home. They made love with a tenderness and passion that spoke of the journey they'd taken to get to this moment, of all the complications and revelations that had led them here. Afterward, as Victoria slept against his chest, Marcus thought about the incredible trajectory that his life had taken. A year ago, he'd been invisible, working maintenance at a country club, struggling to provide for his son. Now he was loved by a woman who'd thought about him every single day for 7 years. Now he was contemplating the possibility of returning to school, of reclaiming the dreams he'd thought were lost forever. It seemed impossible. And yet, as he looked at Victoria sleeping peacefully beside him, as he thought about Ethan's excited face when Victoria had promised to help him design a treehouse, Marcus realized that impossible things were happening every single day. The question was, what would he do with this second chance? 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in the admissions office of Northwestern University with Victoria at his side. The advisor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, was reviewing his file. Your grades from when you attended previously were exceptional, she noted. And based on your test scores and the letters of recommendation you've submitted, I see no reason why we couldn't readmit you and allow you to complete your degree. Marcus felt Victoria's hand squeeze his, offering support and encouragement. The program is competitive, the advisor continued, and you'd be starting again with junior standing credits. You're looking at 2 more years of full-time study. Is that something you're prepared to commit to? Marcus thought about the past week, about how he'd discussed the possibility with Ethan, about how his son had been nothing but enthusiastically supportive. He thought about Victoria's quiet confidence that he could do this. He thought about the young man he'd been at 25, full of dreams and possibilities before life had crushed those dreams into dust. "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "I'm prepared to commit to it." The enrollment was formalized over the following weeks. Marcus gave notice to the country club, though his supervisor, who'd recently become aware of his relationship with the facility's owner, urged him to reconsider. "You've got a good thing here," the man had said. "Don't throw it away chasing something that might not work out." But Marcus had learned something important. Sometimes good wasn't good enough. Sometimes you had to be brave enough to pursue great, even if great was uncertain. The semester began in September, and Marcus threw himself into his studies with an intensity that surprised even himself. Victoria had arranged for him to take Ethan to her penthouse on weekday evenings, allowing him to study while she and Ethan worked on homework together or engaged in any number of activities. On weekends, the three of them maintained their time together. Restaurants, museums, parks, the simple joy of being a family. By November, Marcus had fallen into a rhythm. He was excelling in his classes, his talent for architectural design evident in every project he submitted. His professors noticed him, began to mentor him, saw in him the potential that he'd always possessed. It was also in November that Ethan got sick. It started with a small cough, nothing unusual. But the cough persisted, and Ethan's energy flagged. Victoria, who'd never had responsibility for a child before, became anxious. She took him to the doctor, who prescribed antibiotics, and said it was likely just a stubborn cold. But Ethan wasn't improving. After 2 weeks, Victoria took him back to the doctor, more insistent this time. The doctor ordered tests. The results came back showing something that made Marcus's blood run cold: pneumonia, with an infection that was resistant to the initial antibiotic. Ethan was admitted to the hospital for treatment. Marcus stopped attending classes and camped out in his son's hospital room. Victoria was a constant presence, bringing books and music, sitting with Ethan when he was awake, holding his hand when he slept. It was a terrifying week. Ethan recovered slowly, gradually regaining his strength and energy. By the time he was discharged, both Marcus and Victoria had aged years emotionally. "He could have died," Victoria said to Marcus in the hospital parking lot, tears streaming down her face. "I could have lost him." "But you didn't," Marcus said, holding her as she cried. "He's okay. We're all okay." "No," Victoria said, pulling back to look at him. "I realized something while he was in there. I realized that I don't want to live a life where I'm separated from him, from you, for even a moment longer than necessary. Marcus, I want to marry you. I want it officially, legally, publicly. I want to be Ethan's stepmother. I want our family to be real in every way." Marcus felt emotion rising in his throat. "Are you sure? Because, Victoria, your life was very different before Ethan and I came into it. My life was empty before you came into it," Victoria said fiercely. "This, you and Ethan, this struggle and joy and fear and love, this is what makes life worth living. So yes, I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." Marcus kissed her in the parking lot of Northwestern Hospital, not caring that people were watching. "Then let's get married," he said. "Let's make this official." Planning a wedding while maintaining full-time graduate studies and a newly recovered son would have been overwhelming for most people, but Victoria thrived on the challenge. She hired a wedding planner, gave them a budget and a vision, and let them execute. The wedding was set for June, after Marcus completed his spring semester and Ethan had finished his school year. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with ordinary happiness. Marcus continued his studies, earning straight A's in his classes. Ethan returned to school and quickly caught up on the work he'd missed. Victoria managed her company with renewed energy, having found that the satisfaction of helping people she loved was more fulfilling than any business achievement. It was Ethan who suggested the honeymoon destination. "You guys should go to that place where you met," he said casually one evening while they were planning. "The Rosewood place." Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances, then laughed. "That's actually perfect," Victoria said. "We'll ask them to arrange something special for our anniversary return." Or as the wedding date approached, Marcus was struck repeatedly by the absolute certainty that his life had taken exactly the path it was meant to take. 7 years of struggle, of heartbreak, of near despair, all of it had been necessary to bring him to this moment, where he stood at the edge of happiness that he'd once thought impossible. The wedding was held at the Art Institute of Chicago, in a beautiful gallery overlooking the city. Ethan was Marcus's best man, standing proudly in a small tuxedo that matched his father's. Alexander Chen walked Victoria down the aisle, tears streaming down his face as he gave his daughter to the man she loved. The ceremony was intimate, with only close friends and family present, about 100 people in total. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a moment of absolute silence before Ethan, who didn't fully understand the question, raised his hand and said, "I object to missing cake because we've been talking too long." The entire gathering erupted in laughter, and Victoria had to stop herself from crying with joy. The reception was held at her penthouse, transformed by a team of designers into a magical evening space. There was music, dancing, toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Mrs. Chen, Marcus's elderly neighbor who'd watched Ethan countless times over the years, danced with Alexander Chen while telling him stories about what a wonderful father Marcus had been. Richard Sterling, having officially divorced Victoria, sent an expensive crystal sculpture as a wedding gift, a peace offering of sorts. Late in the evening, as Marcus and Victoria danced to a slow song, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Marcus asked. "For not giving up," Victoria replied. "For being brave enough to believe that we could have this. For making my life worth living." "You did that," Marcus said. "You came into our lives and changed everything. You gave me back my dreams." "We gave each other dreams," Victoria corrected. "That's what love is supposed to do." The year following their marriage was marked by steady progress. Marcus completed his degree requirements in spring, graduating with honors. His thesis project, a sustainable housing design for low-income communities, earned him recognition from the school and multiple job offers from prestigious architectural firms. But instead of accepting any of those offers, Marcus made a decision that surprised many. He started his own firm, specifically focused on designing affordable housing and community spaces. Victoria became not just his wife, but his primary financial backer and business partner, bringing her business acumen and resources to his creative vision. The Alexander Chen Foundation, which had been established by Victoria in honor of her father, became their primary client, commissioning designs for educational spaces and community centers across the country. Ethan thrived in his new life. He began advanced art classes and architecture workshops with his grandfather, developing his own creative vision. The relationship between Alexander and his grandson became one of deep mentorship and love, with Alexander often saying that watching Ethan design was like watching the future of architecture unfold. By the time Ethan turned 9, Marcus and Victoria had welcomed a daughter, Maya, into their family. She inherited her mother's dark eyes and her father's creative spirit, and her arrival brought a new dimension of joy to their household. The photograph that had started everything, the one of 7-year-old Ethan hanging in Victoria's study, was joined by new images. There were photographs of Marcus at his architecture desk, sketching designs. There were photographs of Victoria in her company boardroom, leading meetings with the same passion and intelligence that had first drawn Marcus to her. There were photographs of all of them together, Ethan with his arm around his father, Maya sitting on Victoria's shoulders, all four of them smiling at the camera with the kind of genuine joy that couldn't be faked. On a warm evening in June, exactly 2 years after their wedding, Marcus and Victoria sat on the porch of their newly purchased home, a stunning craftsman-style house that Marcus had renovated with his own hands, and watched their children play in the backyard. "Do you remember," Victoria asked, "the night you confronted me about Ethan's photograph?" "How could I forget?" Marcus replied. "I thought you were insane. I thought you were some kind of obsessed stalker." "I was obsessed," Victoria admitted, "but not in a criminal way, just in a completely in love with you way." Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I'm so grateful you were that kind of obsessed," he said. "Because if you hadn't been brave enough to search for me, if you hadn't cared enough to learn about my life, we wouldn't be here." "We would have found each other eventually," Victoria said with certainty. "I believe that. The universe knew we were meant to be together." "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe we were just brave enough to choose each other, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Inside the house, Alexander was helping Ethan and Maya prepare to build something they'd been planning for weeks. An elaborate structure that combined architecture and art in a way that only that particular family could conceive of. The photograph that had set everything in motion still hung in Victoria's study, in the downtown penthouse where Marcus and Victoria still maintained an office and a home base. But now it was surrounded by dozens of other photographs, a visual history of the family they'd built together. And in all of those photographs, what was most evident was the love, the profound, world-changing, absolutely real love that had begun with one night 7 years ago and had transformed two people's lives completely. It was on an ordinary Tuesday evening in March that Marcus received a phone call that shattered the peace of his carefully constructed world. "Mr. Webb, this is Dr. Carlson at Northwestern Hospital. I'm calling about Alexander Chen. He's been admitted to our emergency room following a heart attack." The words felt like they were coming from underwater, muffled and dreamlike. Marcus managed to ask the necessary questions. Yes, Alexander was alive. No, they didn't know his condition yet. Victoria should come to the hospital immediately. Marcus pulled up to the hospital at a speed that would have earned him a ticket if there had been any police officers watching. Victoria was already there, having received a call at her office just minutes before. She was sitting in the waiting room, her face ashen, her hands gripping a cup of cold coffee. "He was meeting with a contractor," Victoria said when she saw Marcus, "just sitting in a conference room, talking about the design for a new community center. And then he just collapsed." Ethan had been picked up from school by their nanny and was currently at home with Maya. Marcus held Victoria as she cried, both of them praying to a universe that had been kinder to them than they had any right to expect. Alexander survived the heart attack, but just barely. He spent 3 days in intensive care while his family waited and worried. When he finally woke up, the first thing he did was ask about Ethan. "My grandson," he insisted, his voice hoarse from the ventilator tube. "I need to see my grandson." Marcus and Victoria brought Ethan to the hospital, uncertain how their 9-year-old would handle the sight of his grandfather looking so vulnerable. But Ethan, with the remarkable resilience and sensitivity of childhood, simply took Alexander's hand and said, "You have to get better, Grandpa. We have the community center to finish designing." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "I know, buddy," he whispered. "I'm going to get better, I promise." His recovery was long and difficult. Alexander had to make significant lifestyle changes, accepting limitations that he'd never had to face before. But he was alive, and for Marcus and Victoria that was everything. What the heart attack revealed, though, was a deeper truth that they all had to confront. Time was not infinite. The people they loved could be taken from them. The future they'd spent so much time planning could be altered or lost in an instant. It prompted Marcus and Victoria to have conversations they'd been avoiding. What would happen to Ethan and Maya if something happened to them? How would they protect the legacy of work they were building? What truly mattered, now that they'd been given this reminder of mortality? The conversations led to changes. They updated their wills and trust documents. They established educational funds for Ethan and Maya that would ensure they could pursue any dream they wanted. They talked about the importance of family and legacy, about the responsibility they had to pass on the values that had brought them together. Most importantly, they held each other with a new appreciation for the gift of time. They spent evenings with Alexander, listening to his stories, letting him share his wisdom. They made sure Ethan and Maya knew how much they were loved. They stopped planning for some distant future and started living fully in the present. 5 years after his heart attack, Alexander was still designing and mentoring, his work as vital as it had ever been. He'd become a beloved figure in the architecture community, known for his mentorship of young designers and his commitment to affordable, beautiful design for all communities. It was Alexander who suggested the idea of the exhibit. "You should show your work," he said to Marcus during one of their regular working sessions. "Not in a gallery, though that would be nice, but in a way that tells the story of how you came from nothing and built something meaningful." Marcus was initially hesitant. The story involved Victoria's obsessive investigation, his heartbreak with Sarah, his struggle as a single parent. It felt too personal to share with the world. But Victoria loved the idea. "People need to know that it's possible," she said. "People need to know that love can transcend class boundaries, that dreams don't have expiration dates, that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." The exhibit opened at the Art Institute of Chicago in November. It was called "From Nothing, the Architecture of Love," and it displayed Marcus's most significant designs alongside the story of how he'd come to create them. There were photographs of the modest apartment where he'd lived as a single father, contrasted with images of the beautiful buildings he'd designed. There was a section dedicated to the Chen Foundation's impact, showing before and after images of communities transformed by thoughtful design. And there, in the center of the exhibit, was the original photograph, the one that had started everything. Ethan, at age 7, smiling, that gap-toothed grin, hanging on the wall where it had all begun. The placard below it read, "The photograph that changed everything, a reminder that love sees what others miss." The exhibit was widely attended and critically acclaimed, but more importantly, it sparked conversations about the role of design in creating community, about the possibility of beautiful spaces for everyone, not just the wealthy. Ethan, now 14, attended the opening with pride. He was working on his own designs, having been accepted into an advanced architecture program at his school. He was becoming his own person, not defined by his family's unusual story, but enriched by it. Maya, at age 5, was fascinated by the exhibit. She ran from image to image, pointing out details, asking questions. "That one is pretty," she said, pointing to one of Marcus's community center designs. "I want to build that when I grow up." "You will," Victoria said, pulling her daughter close. "You can build whatever you want, sweetheart." That evening, at the private reception following the exhibit opening, Marcus stood with Victoria overlooking the main gallery space. Alexander was being interviewed by an art magazine. Ethan was discussing design with one of Marcus's colleagues, and Maya was coloring pictures at a small table set up for children. "We've built something beautiful," Victoria said, slipping her hand into Marcus's. "We have," Marcus agreed. "Not just the buildings, but the life, the family." "Do you remember," Victoria asked, "that first night when you confronted me about the photograph? Do you remember thinking I was crazy?" I remember thinking a lot of things, Marcus said. I remember being angry, confused, terrified. I remember not understanding how someone like you could be interested in someone like me. And now? Victoria asked. Now I understand that love isn't rational, Marcus said. It's not about matching circumstances or similar backgrounds. It's about seeing someone completely and being willing to choose them, even when the world says it's impossible. Victoria looked up at him, tears in her eyes. I love you so much, she whispered. I love you too, Marcus replied. 7 years ago, 8 years from now, for all the years we have left, I love you completely. 10 years after that fateful evening in Victoria's study, Marcus and Victoria sat on the same balcony where they'd first met at the Rosewood Gala. They'd requested a private room, and the hotel had obliged, knowing who Victoria was. The Chicago skyline spread before them, glittering in the evening light, more beautiful than either of them remembered. They'd come back to the hotel for their anniversary, returning to the place where everything had started. It felt important somehow to return to the beginning while standing so completely in the end of the story they'd been writing together. Marcus was 37 years old now, and at the height of his career. His architectural firm was known worldwide for its commitment to ethical design and community-centered spaces. He had a book deal in the works, writing about the philosophy and practice of architecture designed for people rather than for profit. Victoria was 32 and had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of her company to focus on her foundation work. Under her leadership, the Alexander Chen Foundation had funded hundreds of projects, impacting thousands of lives. She was happier than she'd ever been, more fulfilled by giving than by accumulating. Ethan was 14, brilliant and creative, talking about studying architecture at Northwestern just like his father. Maya was 8, already designing elaborate spaces for imaginary creatures that only existed in her creative mind. And Alexander, now in his 70s, was still working, still mentoring, still bringing the wisdom of a lifetime to bear on the question of how to make the world more beautiful. I've been thinking about something, Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. What's that? Marcus asked, turning to look at his wife. That night, 7 years before we met, I was so broken. I felt completely alone, like no one in the world could ever understand me. And then you appeared on a balcony and you listened to me. You saw me, and I thought that was the most important moment of my life. It was, Marcus said softly. But I was wrong, Victoria continued. The most important moment was when you stood in my study, angry and confused, confronting me about that photograph. Because in that moment, you were fighting for something you believed in. You were protecting someone you loved. You were brave enough to step into the unknown. Where are you going with this? Marcus asked, though he thought he knew. I'm saying, Victoria said, taking his hand, that the night you asked me to marry you wasn't the most important moment either. And our wedding day wasn't. None of those big, obvious moments were the most important. The most important moments were all the small ones. Every breakfast you cooked for the kids, every time Ethan called me Mom, every evening we sat together just like this, present and grateful and absolutely sure of our choice. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. I love you, he said. From then to now to forever, I love you. And I love you, Victoria replied. Not the idealized version of you that I created in my head during those 7 years of waiting. Not the memory of the man from the gala, but the real you. The man who works hard, who makes mistakes, who loves his children fiercely, who's brave enough to dream and determined enough to chase those dreams. They kissed as the sun set over Chicago, the same city that had brought them together and that had witnessed every moment of their journey since. In the distance, they could see the buildings that Marcus had designed, beautiful spaces created with the intention of serving people, of bringing joy and functionality to neighborhoods that needed both. Behind them, through the glass doors, they could see the hotel staff, discreetly keeping their distance, but clearly aware of the romantic moment unfolding. Above them, the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. "What do you think Ethan will say when he falls in love?" Marcus asked suddenly. Victoria laughed. "He'll probably say it's illogical and indefensible, and then he'll design a building for the woman, which will be how he tells her he loves her. And Maya will probably announce it to everyone within a 100-mile radius and expect everyone to understand how perfect it is," Victoria said. "She has your emotional honesty and my complete lack of filter." They continued talking as night fell, continuing the conversation they'd been having for 10 years and would continue to have for the rest of their lives. They talked about their children, their dreams, the future they were building together. They talked about how grateful they were for the journey, even the painful parts, because those parts had made them who they were meant to be. Finally, as midnight approached, Marcus asked Victoria a question. "If you could go back and change one thing, would you?" Victoria considered this carefully. "I would go back to that night at the gala," she said slowly, "and I wouldn't leave it up to chance. I would ask you for your name. I would give you mine. I would make sure we had a way to find each other." "Would that have made the ending different?" Marcus asked. "No," Victoria said with absolute certainty. "The ending would be the same. We would still be here together on this balcony in love, but we would have lost those 7 years, and I don't think I'm willing to trade those 7 years for the convenience of meeting you sooner. Because in those years, I became the person who could truly love you, and you became the man worth waiting for." Marcus pulled her close, and they stood together looking out at the city, at the life they'd built, at the future that stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. "Forever?" Victoria asked, resting her head on his chest. "Forever," Marcus confirmed, "and always."